When discussing failed systems, there are two aspects that are not often considered. One being a failure in the marketplace, the other a financial failure. These two are not always mutually exclusive. The Sega Saturn and 32X were both profitable, though they are considered a failure for not living up to market expectations. The Dreamcast is seen by many to have been semi-successful, though in reality, it lost mass amounts of money, creating a state of insolvency for Sega, a dire situation that put the company on the brink of bankruptcy, only to be saved by Asawa Akawa, who used his personal fortune to bail them out. Looking at the totality of home gaming systems, most hardware can be seen as nothing but a failure from top to bottom. This list consists of consoles that are obscure, such as the Microvision, or the rather well known, like the CDI, 3DO, and Atari Jaguar. These were all financial and marketing disasters. Nintendo's Virtual Boy? Well, it also fits into this category. The system was both a massive commercial and financial failure for Nintendo, in part because it was released before it was ready for prime time. Against Gunpei Yokoi's wishes, Nintendo rushed the platform to launch, releasing to the public a system that was not considered to be in a finished state. All this because the Virtual Boy had already been in development for 4 years, and Nintendo needed all hands on deck in support of the pending Nintendo 64. All this according to David Sheff. Nintendo also played gatekeeper over the platform's development kits, leading to very few third-party developers having any kind of access. The vast majority of the games were developed in-house or by teams with close second-party ties. The Virtual Boy had another issue. It appeared to be positioning itself as Nintendo's foray into virtual reality, but when consumers finally tried it, they realized the Virtual Boy was closer to a live-action Viewmaster than anything else. I, for one, had tried virtual reality prior to the Virtual Boy's release, and felt the system didn't meet expectations put in place by its marketing campaign, and I'm not alone in this. Miyamoto has stated Virtual Boy had two big tasks to accomplish, and it went out into the world without satisfying either one. It's not so much that the machine itself was wrong as a product, but that we were wrong in how we portrayed it. On launch, Nintendo projected 3 million units would sell in Japan by March of 1996, with an additional 1.5 million units sold in North America by the end of 1995. By the end of 1995, less than 140,000 units had been sold in Japan, causing Nintendo to rethink their commitment to the hardware. As 1995 came to a close, the president of Nintendo felt he needed to clarify their position. Despite the lack of unique titles, we still thought it could be sold. I want to return to the starting point and find titles that emphasize the difference that Virtual Boy games can provide. I want to start afresh in 1996. Most sources state December 22, 1995 for Japan, and March 1996 for North America as the cancellation date, as these were the dates the final games for the hardware would release. However, I don't think it's that clear, as games continue to be showcased and announced for release at Space World Japan in late November of 1995, and again at E3 in mid-May 1996. In total, the Virtual Boy was on shelves for around 5 to 7 months before it became clear that support was lacking. Plans to relaunch the system at a lower price point alongside a whole host of second-generation budget-friendly games was put in motion, but never materialized, something we'll be discussing in the next segment. By the time it was all over, total systems sold is said to sit at around 770,000, though most people who are active in the community suspect the true number to be much lower due to systems manufactured for sale in Japan being repackaged for sale in North America. When speaking on the topic of the Virtual Boy in discussion with Iwata, iToy stated, Nintendo is a company who, when it hits the mark, sells 10 million of something. If you don't sell that much, it's considered a failure. I think it's clear that between the last release and the plan for relaunch in mid-1996, Nintendo decided it was best to cut all losses and move on. With support for the hardware essentially being non-existent during its life, and the platform being discontinued months into its existence, only around 60 games in total were in development, with only 22 ever releasing to the public. This is a look at the games that remain unreleased in a mostly alphabetical list that will be released in multiple parts, so enjoy. This is Retro Impressions Unreleased Nintendo Virtual Boy. With the Virtual Boy flatlining, Nintendo started gearing up for what was being touted as a relaunch. They acquired the rights to the most promising titles in development by second and third party teams and set plans in place to reintroduce the system at a lower sub $100 price point alongside a library of games offered up at budget prices. Nintendo felt Bound High was the killer app needed for success. This was a top-down action game reminiscent of Breakout. You control a ball that bounces up and down with the task of eliminating all enemies without falling off the stage. Bound High was fully complete, with sealed copies produced and ready to ship for the American market when Nintendo pulled the plug, leaving it lost for 14 years. In 2010, the source code was discovered, and shortly after, the complete game was compiled and released for play. Overall, most people agree that this is one of the best games on the platform, and its cancellation was a massive miss for fans and the Virtual Boy. A sequel would release for the Game Boy around a year later titled Chalvo 55, which has at this point remained a Japanese exclusive. Bound High wasn't alone in Nintendo's budget relaunch plan though. They had also acquired the rights to Dragon Hopper, and after the game was complete, even showcased it in a 2-page spread in Nintendo Power. In Dragon Hopper, you played a dragon named Dorian in what appeared to be a promising action-adventure experience. The game showcased at E3 in 1996 to rave reviews, with some folks comparing it to the Zelda series, while also feeling it was the game that could turn the system around. Unfortunately, this too was cancelled along with the system. To this day, only home footage from E3 1996 shows the game in action. There are known prototypes in private collectors' hands, but when and if they're ever made public is anyone's guess. To press the point home of just how close these two games were to release, both had received their ESRB ratings. Rumors have persisted for some time regarding Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2, both being in development for the Virtual Boy. How close to reality was this? According to Steve Hurst, the game in development was a 3D conversion of the original Donkey Kong Country. Early test versions used the sprites from the Game Boy release and consisted of a few scrolling screens. Hurst stated that the initial work looked fantastic, but the additional labor required to properly utilize the hardware made the process taxing on their available resources. This appears to be where the confusion comes from, as Rare clarified this on their Scribes Q&A page on August 2001. While assets from the original Donkey Kong were being used in test builds, the game in development was indeed Donkey Kong Country 2. Development started late in the system's short life, so when Nintendo pulled the plug, the entire team shifted gears to Donkey Kong Country 3 for the SNES, putting Rare's only game in development for the Virtual Boy to bed. Rare not only clarified the DK confusion, they also addressed their involvement in the GoldenEye 007 game in development for the same system. It had been assumed that Rare was behind this game, but in reality, there was no connection. And the folks at Rare weren't even aware that this game was announced. So what do we know? Nintendo held the license for James Bond at the time, and there was a game in development for the platform. The game was touted as a Spy Hunter clone that solely took place behind the wheel of a car. Beyond one screenshot and a brief accompanying description, nothing else is known, including who exactly Nintendo pegged to handle the game development. Doraemon was deep into development and slated for release in March 1996. The game was previewed in Japanese magazine Denki Super Famicom in January of that same year. Doraemon was an action shooter based on the popular manga and anime series that relied on roller coaster and bungee jumping for its movement mechanic. As the game took place in a theme park, a number of minigames were also included, along with 5 unique characters the player could choose from. The game's development appeared to be nearly complete when it was cancelled along with the system. As of this video, no additional information about the game has ever surfaced. The company with the most cancellations outside of Nintendo was Coconuts Japan Entertainment. According to a company release schedule for 1995, Coconuts had 5 total games in development for the Virtual Boy, with 4 slated for release in 1995, indicating work at the very least had started on some and was well underway for others. Space Squash was a hockey game slated for release in August of 1995 and did release 1 month behind schedule. Coconuts also released info on their game Proteus Zone, a 3D shooter where you float down corridors, shooting monsters over 20 stages. Not much else is known, as the press release didn't give much details beyond an in-game mechanic that linked all enemies to a boss, meaning you could focus on a boss to wipe out all enemies rather than clearing the enemies first. Like Space Squash, Proteus Zone was talked about in at least one Japanese magazine, though no in-game screenshots are known to exist. One interesting note about Proteus Zone is it was announced with Space Squash with a release date set 1 month later. After Space Squash was delayed, so was Proteus Zone by a month to October. Once October came, the game was pushed back again to March of 1996, all indications being that the game was well into development. The other games from Coconuts Japan are Interceptor, which was billed as a sports game, a war simulation thought to be called Starseed, and Sunday's Point. Nothing's known about these games, and as of this video, no additional information regarding these games has been made public. Faceball, not baseball. You know, the wildly popular game where you're a ball with a face on it in a Wolfenstein 3D style maze shooter. Actually, it's a bit unfair to Faceball to state this, as the 3D maze shooter has roots dating all the way back to Maze War, released in 1973. Faceball itself is a port of the 1987 multiplayer 3D maze shooter called MIDI Maze, which predates Wolfenstein by 5 years, so while Wolfenstein mainstreamed this genre, other games like it had existed for some time. Faceball was fairly popular, receiving ports to a ton of systems, including the Virtual Boy, where it was rumored to be nearly complete when the game was cancelled. Fast forward to 2012, and Big Mac of Planet Virtual Boy announced that he had finally found a prototype someone was willing to sell. However, one huge obstacle remained. The person holding the prototype wanted a king's ransom for it. Not wanting to miss out on what might be the only opportunity to acquire the game for the community, Big Mac enlisted Ben Stevens to assist in financing the purchase. The move required Big Mac to liquidate most of his Virtual Boy collection, but for him, the trade-off was worth it. Big Mac would keep his promise, releasing the game to the public shortly after, along with offering a limited release on physical cart for those who wish to help recoup the cost involved with obtaining the game. For the most part, the game is complete with a fully fleshed out single player experience. The arena mode, offering the promised 2-player support, was never finished, though the modding community remains engaged with the game to this day, so 2-player support could be in the pipeline down the road. I want to give a huge shout out to Planet Virtual Boy, whose incredible community has worked tirelessly to catalog and track down everything Virtual Boy related. Specifically, I want to thank Benjamin Stevens, who's almost solely responsible for finding and translating almost every document we have from Japan regarding the system and its games. One crazy reality is most of the information regarding undocumented Virtual Boy games only made it into Japanese magazines, and with the short life of the system, it didn't leave many issues to cover the limited info released to these publications. So thanks again to Benjamin Stevens for his work, because without it, this series, it wouldn't be possible. That's it for now, and until next time, thank you for watching Retro Impressions.